All right, we should be live. Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet. I hope you are having a fantastic day or evening or night or wherever you are, whatever you do over there where you are. I'm here today with a guest that I wanted to talk to for quite a while, and who actually has a lot of nice things to say about the Quran, which is a very holy book. My guest here is Abdullah Gondal. That's right? Is that how you say it, Gondal?
My name is Abdullah Gondal. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure, and likewise, I've been wanting to talk to you and collaborate with you. And you're bringing an amazing platform and voice to these issues as well.
Thank you. I'm really glad to have you here. I think I wanted to talk to you for quite a while. We never actually came together and communicated. It was all just messaging and chatting, texting. I don't know why we haven't done this before. And I feel like you can bring a very different value to this, which is I see that you study Islamic scripture a lot, and you go a lot into what is wrong with it, what are some interesting things about it. You share those facts with people. And you can tell us a lot about Islamic scripture and history. So that's why I invited you here today. I want to talk about the preservation of the Quran, about which you have, I think, made a lot of progress in studying it and understanding it and sharing knowledge about it. And especially in the recent days, there's also been a lot of stuff going on in the intellectual Islamic world, which is a weird thing to say because I don't believe there's much of intellectual value there, but I'm not here for mockery. It's anyway. There's been a lot of stuff going around about the preservation of the Quran. Yasir said some problematic things that other Muslims have disagreed with. The whole claim that Islam has always been perfectly preserved has kind of been a subject of criticism and doubts. And that is really a very important aspect in Islam, because in Islam we learn that the Quran is the only book that has been perfectly preserved, and it comes from Allah directly, and that has never been changed and can never be changed. And I don't want to say too much. I don't want to say too many words. I want to rather leave the discourse in that to you and ask you some questions. So what is this all about? Can you tell us more about the preservation of the Quran and the controversies about it?
So the issue starts with Muslims believing that the Quran is the literal verbatim speech of God. That leaves very little flexibility in how you interpret or internalize the speech. Now, the problem happens is Allah, being omnipotent and omniscient, claims himself in the Quran in Surah 15, verse 9. And he says that I've sent down this reminder and I will guard it. Just a side note is that this God does not have the best track record, by his own admission, to guard and protect his books from corruption. Like, as you can see, Bible, Torah, everything gets corrupted. Only Islam the Quran is there. So Muslims generally have claimed, or at least lay Muslim thinks, that there is one singular text of the Quran, and that the Quran is preserved dot to dot, letter by letter, tashkil to tashkil, and some people even say vowel sign to vowel sign. Right? This claim can also be found in Tafhim al-Quran, works of Maududi. And what we will do is we will go take a deep dive into the Quranic preservation claim to completely and categorically show that no, it wasn't perfectly or miraculously preserved. So before we get into it, what I want to put out here is the Quran is well preserved, especially relative to the Bible, post-Uthmanic canonization. The well preservation still is not miraculous because it does have its flaws. It appears as a human work with its flaws, like as in human memory or the diacritical marks not being there, so you see some variance. So what we will do today, and I'm taking a top-down approach, is we're going to start with the Qur'ans we see today, the modern Qur'ans. We're going to see some variance in them and how they sometimes might affect the meaning and sometimes they don't. Then we will go to the manuscripts and we will see the Sana Quran's lower text as to the extent of variance. And I'm not kidding you, will be shocked. Once we go past the Sana Quran, we will talk briefly about the companion codices, and then we'll jump into some hadith that bring into question even more about the story and the narrative of the Quranic preservation. So to summarize what happened is Yasir Qadi, he's an academic PhD from Yale, he admitted that the standard narrative of Quranic preservation has holes in it. And this this erupted and became very controversial amongst the Muslims. Because the thing is, the Quran is the backbone of Islam. If the Quran's preservation and authenticity is called into question, Islam falls apart. And that's the problem here. And as soon as you claim it's the verbatim speech of God, like I said, there's no flexibility. So I'll screen share the presentation now.
Okay.
And we will start. But
I believe you've done this before, right?
Yeah, I've done this before a few times. Okay, so can everybody see the presentation? Is it clear? Red one?
It is. I can see it now. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So before we go forward, I want to show you guys a clip of a famous Dawah personality that we all love and cherish, Muhammad Hijab. He made this video, I believe, in 2015, talking about the preservation of the Quran. And in this video, he claims that the Quran is preserved dot to dot, letter to letter. So let's start by that, so that you know it's not my claim. And then we will get into the variants.
I think it's to point out again. You kind of explain it, but I think it's important to point out how important this claim is. This doctrine is that the Quran was perfectly preserved. This is really the foundation of Islam, the fundamentals of Islam. So for Islam to be true, the Quran must have been perfectly preserved. That is the core claim that Islam makes. That this is the only perfect book, the only flawless book that exists, the only message that comes from the Almighty Creator of Allah that exists, and that it can never be changed, which makes Islam miraculous and true for all times. Which means if it is changed, if it turns out that this Quran hasn't been preserved from the beginning, and that we can't actually trace it back to some legitimate origin, then Islam completely falls apart.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I had to throw it in.
No problem. So let's view this 15-second clip of Muhammad Hijab.
I think we can't hear the sound.
Oh.
I think you have to, when you share the screen, you have to do this thing, share with audio or something like that.
Okay, well, what we'll do is I'll summarize what he basically says is the Quran is a speech of Allah. Allah has promised to preserve it. It's preserved word to word, letter to letter, vowel sign for vowel sign. So he's going by the dot by dot narrative. And then he says that Allah promised to preserve it. And he then claims that the preservation of the Quran is the biggest miracles of the Quran. That was his claim. Now, the way I want to undo this is one of the problems we see is Muslims say that there's one Quran, and they'll say that you can pick up any Quran anywhere in the world right now, and it will have the same text, not a dot, not a letter will change. This is blatantly false. And the problem is that Muslim scholars have known about all of these issues for thousands of years. And they have documented them too. But the issue is the lay Muslim has not been told this. In fact, he's been fed a lie about this miraculous preservation and whatnot. So that's why you realize why Dr. Yasir Qadi kept saying, don't discuss this in public, because if you start discussing this in public, the Quran loses its miraculous allure, and it becomes just like a historical book, which is well preserved with its flaws. So without further ado, I'll just give you a quick rundown. So these are the riwayat of the Quran. So these are the bunch of different Qur'ans you can find. So on the left, you see the names of the readers, Nafi, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Amir, Hamza, Kisai, and whatnot. And then there are the transmitters. So they had these students who would transmit. Normally, most of them had 2 students, some of them have 3. What we see is one of the most famous Qur'ans that is being used right now is this version, Hafs bin Asim, okay? And it's not actually wasn't the most prominent version throughout Islamic history either. Instead, actually in 1924, it was canonized officially by Al-Azhar. But in essence, the actual Sunni claim is that there are at least 7 Sahih reading of the Quran, and there's about 10, and then some even push it to 14, and I've heard numbers up to 36. So these Qur'ans have variance within themselves. These are all equally authentic. That's what's very important. No Qur'an should take precedence over the other. And just because Hafs is being used predominantly now does not mean it was the same case in history. Now that we have this out of the way, we will get to our variants. Now what I'm about to show you is actual images from the scripture, and I'll highlight the Arabic text and then the translation as well, where the meanings change or what is being changed. So let's start with our first example. We have from Surah GHAFIR, Surah 40, verse 26. So on the left side, you see Hafs text, which is the common text we see. In that it says, أو أن يظهر في الأرض الفساد. Whereas Warsh says, وأن يظهر. So it seems like an extra alif is in the Hafs version, whereas the Warsh version is missing one alif. Now, how does it affect the meaning? It doesn't really affect the meaning in a way, but the problem here is this is a historical claim. Look what's happening. Allah is quoting, it seems, the words of Pharaoh. Now, here's the thing. Pharaoh is a human being. So if Allah is quoting him, Pharaoh can only speak in one way. He doesn't speak in variants. So either Pharaoh said he will change your religion, or that he will cause corruption, or he said he will change your religion and that he will cause corruption in the land. Mm-hmm. So what we are seeing now is a historical thing, is what did Pharaoh actually say? Because like I said, Allah is an omnipotent, omniscient deity. He can absolutely, clearly, and specifically with precision quote people. At the same time, I would like to add that the Quran doesn't always quote people verbatim. Sometimes it's a summarized form, but you can, by reading the text, decipher if it's being quoted directly or not. Now, yeah, if you have any questions.
So just to clarify, what we're saying here is that it's not that the verse is completely different, but that a letter which slightly changes the meaning in this verse is different. But some people would say, so what's the big deal with that? I mean, it's just a letter. It's not the entire sentence. There is no huge difference. But this is actually very important, because the Quran is supposed to have been directly sent, constructed by Allah for the average person to see. So if I'm holding a Quran in my hands, if I hold this Quran in my hand, this Quran is supposed to have been directly planned and worded, spoken by Allah, or have existed with him all the time from the beginning of time, and will always exist until the end of time. But what we're seeing here is that the text in 2 different types of the Quran is clearly different. Although there is no big difference, the letters are different, which tells us, wait, isn't there a problem here? Doesn't this mean that there has been something wrong with the preservation of this text?
Yeah, so what you see a lot of the times in these variants is these variants are there just not bringing a lot of value or meaning to the verse. And you will see as we progress, we have about 40 some examples from modern Qur'ans. But they're there for no reason, and if anything, they don't bring value to the verse. They just add more confusion and make it seem more so that, okay, maybe the alif, the scribe forgot to add it, and that's what led to this variant reading. But then again, we question, how do we know if that's a mistake, or was it the ahruf reveal, right? We will get to that in a later. But the point here to take is, if Allah is quoting Pharaoh or Firaun saying something, he has to quote it precisely. You can't have 2 conflicting statements like that. Anyways, let's go to the next one. So this one is from Surah Hadid, Surah 57, verse 24. In the Hafs text, it reads on the left side, وَمَن يَتَوَلَّ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ. Whereas in the Warsh text, it is missing the phrase huwa. It's just reads فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. So it doesn't change the meaning as much, but it does show that there's a word omitted in one of the readings. So the translation in the Hafs reads, and whoever turns away, still Allah is the absolute. Whoever turns away, still Allah, the absolute, the owner of praise. So the word huwa is he. So indeed Allah, he who is the absolute, the owner of praise. And that's what's missing. Now what we can go is we can go to another example. And this is where this is actual problematic for the meaning. Okay. So in Surah Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 184, in the Hafs text, Allah is talking about fasting, and if you can't fast, you have to feed poor people. In the Hafs text, Allah says, ta'amu miskin, which means feeding a poor person, is one poor person. But in the Warsh text, is ta'ami masakin, it becomes plural. So a singular changed to a plural. Now, if I was to read the Warsh text, I could easily get confused because it's plural, feeding poor people in the plural sense. So wait a second, do we feed one person or do we feed two people? And these are the things, like I said, it's just bringing confusion. It's not really adding much. Now, one other thing is you will see these kind of variants pop up again and again. And just to give you a pointer for the moving forward, is keep an eye on the verse numberings as well. Verse numberings rarely ever align between these readings. And why is that important as well? Is because a lot of Islamic Quran miracle claims, like the mathematical miracles or the linguistic miracles, are incumbent upon the precision of the Quranic language and verse division. But when you actually see that the verse division is off by quite a bit, sometimes you'll see that the verse is the same, but on the right side it'll be off by three verses. So it doesn't add up for these miracle linguistic claims.
So think about this. You are two people, two Muslims, and both of them are always thought that the Quran is this perfect book, and that the Quran that you are holding in your hands was directly word for word revealed by Allah through Gabriel to Muhammad, who then spoke it to his scribes, who then wrote it down. And the Quran that you're holding in your hand, the biggest miracle of the Quran is that it has been preserved directly from Allah. It comes directly from the source, and word for word is the same. But you are two people, two Muslims, who are amazed by this fact that the Quran has been perfectly preserved, and you are sitting together and you are reading this part, and you come across this verse, and one of you is reading and saying a ransom of feeding a poor person, but then the other person says, hey, wait, it doesn't say poor person, it says poor people. And then you show each other the Qurans, and in both Qurans it says something different. And then you look at each other and think, wait, isn't this Quran supposed to have been perfectly preserved, perfectly revealed from Allah directly through Gabriel to Muhammad, to the scribes, to us in our hands? Isn't this Quran supposed to be directly the word that Allah gave through Gabriel to Muhammad? And you find out, no, there are variations in here. So what are you supposed to think about the rest of the Quran, of the Quran's chain of revelations up until it lands in your hands? Obviously, there is something fishy, something wrong here.
Mm-hmm. And as we progress, I kid you not, this video will be shocking to a lot of people, and the examples will get deeper and deeper. And I won't spoil it, so let's just go to the next example. Here, this one is Surah KAHF, Surah 18, verse 36. So in the Hafs text, it says, لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا. Okay. Whereas in the Warsh text, it says, لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهُمَا مُنْقَلَبًا. Also, what I've highlighted is, as I pointed out, the verse numberings are off. As you can see that there's a division of verse ends and starts in Hafs, but that doesn't happen that in Warsh, and it just keeps going. So let's read the translation and how this changes the meaning ever so slightly. So in the Hafs version, we see, and I do not think the hour will occur, and even if I should be brought back to my Lord, I will surely find better than this a return, as in a singular. And In the Warsh it says, surely you will find better than these as a return, min huma. It doesn't affect the meaning per se a lot because he's talking about his gardens in the previous verses, but it's just peculiar that there's a whole letter and phrase added and the verse is off, and it doesn't give credence to that it's perfectly preserved. And you can also see these things being possible lapses in human memory or somebody misheard it, because they also say that it's very dependent on oral transmission. Anyways, let's go to the next example.
David would just said, I'm starting to think that there might be some holes in the narrative.
No, it's actually a funny thing on Twitter. Some guy said that the Quran is the Titanic and it has a big hole in it. And it's gonna sink, and Muslims keep hoping it stays afloat. That's quite funny.
These are all little poking fun at what Yasir Qadhi said. He said that there is a hole in the narrative, in the standard narrative, that the Quran has been perfectly preserved, which caused the entire outrage and the absurdity that is currently going on in Muslim debates among each other. So it's funny to remind everybody that this was indeed said by a major Muslim apologist and scholar, that there is a hole in the whole narrative, in the basic narrative, that the Quran has been perfectly preserved in its purest form.
All right, so this example is Surah ZUKHRUF, Surah 43, verse 19. In the Hafs text, now this is quite a significant one, and in a sense that how the diacritical marks can change the meaning of the word or the word completely. And what I need to point out here is the early Quranic manuscripts did not have the diacritical or the vowel markings on them. And if you were to remove the diacritical markings from the highlighted phrase on both sides, the skeleton of both of them is identical. Now, here's the problem is the scribe sometimes might, or people who were writing or listening, might have to go by the skeleton, but they had to put the diacritical marks on their own so that's why these words might change. So let's go to the example where it says, وَجَعْلُوا الْمَلَائِكَةَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ. It says in Hafs. The Warsh version reads, وَجَعْلُوا الْمَلَائِكَةَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عِنْدَ الرَّحْمَنِ. So عِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ and عِنْدَ الرَّحْمَنِ. The Hafs version reads, and they have made the angels who are slaves of the most merciful, females. The Warsh reads, and they have made the angels who are with the most merciful, females. So one is saying that these angels are abds of Allah, as in the slaves of Allah, and the other is saying that they are with Allah. That's very peculiar because, like I said, it doesn't add, the existence of this variant doesn't add any benefit. It just makes it seem more that, okay, this is just because the diacritical marks wasn't there and this led to a confusion and it became from ibad to inda rahman.
That's so strange. It's very confusing that this would occur actually in a perfectly preserved
here
book.
We have Surah IMRAN, Surah 3, verse 133. This isn't a major variant on its own, but just to show that there's an extra letter found in the Hafs version. And it reads, وَسَارِي وَلَا مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. Whereas the Warsh just reads, سَارِي وَلَا مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. And like I said earlier, what's the point of this variant? What benefit does this addition of this letter bring? And how does it maybe expand on the meaning or give you something so unique, you know? And how could this be evidence of preservation? The translation is very slightly different. So the letter vowel is used as and here. So it says and hasten to forgiveness, and in Warsh it says hasten to forgiveness. The word and is omitted. Now let's go to another example. And this, like I said, when we get to historical accounts, is very important because we cannot have any room for contradictions, especially if Allah is quoting people. People don't speak in variants like this because Allah can quote precisely. Now here's one example, Surah QASAS, Surah 28, verse 48, and the Hafs side, it talks about the magicians of Moses. So it says, قَالُوا سِحْرًا تَظَاهَرَ in Hafs. In Warsh it says سَاحِرًا. So again, the problem, because of the diacritical marks, weren't the sihran and sahiran are different. Now, what's the difference in meaning? They are, in the Hafs version, it reads, and also remember that Allah seems to be quoting the magicians here. They said, two works of magic supporting each other, whereas in the Warsh it says there are two magicians supporting each other. So now I ask, were there two magic tricks that were cast by one magician, or were there two magicians who cast two separate tricks, or were there two magicians and one of them only casted two tricks? You understand, like with historical things like this, it gets very confusing.
This is very strange. This is a completely different meaning. These are two completely different things if you read them in these two different variants. So there really is no point for this change to happen from one Quran version to the other Quran version.
Exactly. Well, let's go to another one. Now is where we're getting into even more interesting one about, like I said, historical contradictions. Now, what is happening here in Surah Anbiya, chapter 21, verse 4, is Hafs is quoting Muhammad saying something, whereas the Warsh implies that Allah is commanding Muhammad to say something. You can't have it both ways. What happened first? Did Muhammad say this dua, or did Allah command Muhammad first to say the dua? So I'll read the thing. On Hafs it says, قَالَ رَبِّي يَعْلَمُ الْقَوْلُ فِي السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. So here the translation is, he, the prophet, said, my Lord knows whatever is said through the heavens and the earth, and he is the hearing, the knowing. In the Warsh it says, قُلْ رَبِّي يَعْلَمُ الْقَوْلُ, which means Allah is commanding Muhammad to say. So here it says, say, O Muhammad, my Lord knows whatever is said throughout the heaven and the earth, and he is the hearing and the knowing. You can't square these two together. And I heard this one bizarre explanation was that the Quran was revealed, and because Muhammad was reciting the verse, he was also being quoting himself at the same time. It doesn't make sense, it's to me. But
No.
see, what happened first? Did Allah command Muhammad? Muhammad said the dua and Allah quoted it. But also important is the nature of the content of the dua. My Lord knows whatever is said through the heavens and earth, and he is the hearing and the knowing. It seems more likely that Muhammad would say this statement rather than Allah tell him to say this statement, because it's coming from a point where Muhammad is saying my Lord. But that could be a side point. What we will do is we will move to this qala. Just to give you an idea, this qala and qul problem is not just a single occurrence. It happens a few times.
I mean, I would say these are fundamentally very different things. I mean, in one instance, the Quran at this point directly orders Muhammad to say these words. I mean, if you read this Quran, it says, in that one, Allah orders Muhammad to say specific words, like to praise Allah and to say that he knows whatever is said. And in the other version, it only reports that this is what Muhammad said. So in that version, it is not Allah who commands him to say it. It is just Muhammad saying it and Allah reporting it to us for some strange reason. So there really is a major difference here in what is being said and what is being transmitted to you, the reader.
Exactly. And like I said, one could then say that, okay, are these the words of Muhammad, or were they actually the words of Allah and Muhammad repeated Allah's words? So there's
a crucial question.
Yeah, and we never know, right?
Yeah, that is so weird.
Let's go to the next one. So again, in the same surah, Surah Anbiya chapter 21, verse 112, the same thing happens in the Hafs version. It says qala, where it's quoting Muhammad. So in Warsh it says qul. So in Hafs it says قال ربي أحكم بالحق وربنا الرحمن المستعان ولا ما تصفون, which is the Prophet said, my Lord, judge between us in truth, and our Lord is the most merciful, the one whose help is sought against that which you describe. But in the Warsh it says, Allah said to Muhammad, say, O Muhammad, O my Lord, judge thou in truth. So what we have now is another instance. Again, did Muhammad say that first, or did Allah command him? And again, it makes more sense looking at the nature of the dua that my Lord judge between us in truth would be coming from Muhammad first. It sounds more of a human praying to God rather than the other way around. But then again, we have instances where Allah tells him to say specific du'as. Again, a historical contradiction. What happened first?
Honestly, with my experience of the Quran, I would totally think that that Allah is ordering Muhammad or anybody to say something, and he's simply here, addressing the Prophet and making him say something. I mean, that would be from when I think about other verses that contain similar things, where it says "say," where we have several Quran chapters that start with "say," and several Quran verses, prominent ones that start with "say," and then order Muhammad and others to say specific words. So in this case, I would also simply for that familiarity think that Allah wants us, Muhammad first, but all of us to say a specific thing. But that is the problem. That this is what you would think if you read the one version, yet if you read the other version, it is something completely different, and it is just a report about Muhammad. So, dear Muslims who think the Quran has been perfectly preserved and this is directly Allah's word, what do you exactly think about this? What are we supposed to think about this? This is quite confusing.
Exactly. Now let's go to another example. And this one is interesting. Surah Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 119. So the Hafs version says, وَلَا تُسْأَلْ عَنْ أَصْحَابِ الْجَحِيمِ. The Warsh version says, تَسْأَلْ, whereas Hafs said تُسْأَلْ. So literally, like I said, the vowel markings, the vowel sounds can change the meaning. So in Hafs, it says, indeed we have sent you, O Muhammad, with the truth as a bringer of good tidings and a warner. And this is where the variant is. And you will not be asked about the companions of hellfire. Whereas in the Warsh version, it becomes, and do not ask about the companions of hellfire. This is quite important. In one place, Allah is saying, I will not question you about them and what they do. But then in the other one, it says, Allah is saying, telling him, do not ask me about them.
This is a completely different thing.
Exactly. It's very important, and it means completely different.
So for the context, Abdullah, for clarification, obviously people would wonder about what Muslim apologists who are familiar with these issues say in response to these things. So how exactly do Muslim apologists, for example, explain this discrepancy of these two variants, which completely conflict in their meaning with each other?
Yeah, so normally they will say that the readings, all of them, all the variants are all revealed by Allah, and they cite this hadith about ahruf. I have the hadith in the last part. We will get to a detailed discussion about the ahruf, but to give you a gist of it, ahruf is the save it all, get out of jail free card for Muslims. It's vague, and they'll say that every one of them is complementing each other. They're all revealed, and they can't be viewed in isolation. That's what they'll say. They'll say they have to be read together, and all the verses need to be viewed with their content joined. So you can't view them in isolation, in the sense that you can't say, oh, what says and do not ask, and then Hafs says and you will not. It's actually Allah saying you will not be asked, and you shouldn't also ask. That's what they come up with. It's their reasoning. They combine all the verses and all the variants and come up with a compound explanation for it. And one of the problems, they will keep saying that there is no contradiction. But like I said, there are just straight up contradictions that cannot be squared unless you start arguing about a Schrodinger's Quran or a quantum mechanic version of ahruf where superposition words are coming out in different variants. It gets bizarre.
It doesn't really answer the question, right? I mean, why do we have these different versions to begin with? I mean,
exactly, right?
Why would that happen with a book that explicitly and very specifically, very prominently claims to be the one book that is one and that is unchangeable, that to which no human can make any addition or any change, which exists directly as it existed before creation and will always exist in the same way? Why would there be multiple different versions of this, and the versions clearly have discrepancies with each other? Why would this possibly exist?
Exactly. So one of the reasons they give is that Gabriel revealed it in different ways. to help people recite whatever is easy for them. But like I said, a lot of these variants, they don't bring any ease or any value to the words. They're just there, and they, if anything, lead you to believe, okay, this probably the scribal error, and it got incorporated into the manuscript, and then it became part of the recital, and Muslims have been reciting a scribal error. Who knows? One of the problems that is also important is this. I was going to discuss in later, but I'll share it now. Is the Quran does not claim it has any variants. You can only source external hadith that probably were written 100 years after Muhammad to say that the Quran has variants, which were most probably back projections and post-hoc rationalizations to explain this mess. And we will get to, when we get to the manuscript, we'll briefly talk about the companion codices and how much conflict they had and the discrepancies. And then you'll understand why Osman had to take a huge step and why it made sense that he had to burn the Quran. Because the discrepancy between the Sahaba was just too much. So what we'll see is that every layer from the modern Quran, the manuscript, the Sahaba, the Hadith to Muhammad, you'll see every step of the way, it is anything but perfect, miraculous preservation.
Wonderful.
All right, let's go to the next example. So this is Surah BAQARAH, chapter 2, verse 140. In the Hafs version, it says, Am taquluna inna Ibrahim wa Ismaila wa Ishaq. Whereas Warsh says, Am yaqulun. So the translation is, or do you say that Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob and the descendants were Jews or Christians? Versus the Warsh version, which says, or do they say that Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob were the descendants? So it's, do you say that or do they say that? Now, it doesn't make sense for Allah to say, do you say that? Because if you read the previous verses, there's a conversation. And if you look at the flow of the conversation, it should be the non-Muslims saying, they saying that Abraham and Ismail and Jacob were descendants of Jews and Christians, because Muslims. And then Muhammad replies, actually, what's also interesting is after this, Allah then says to reply, are you more knowing, or is Allah? Again, it could also be used and explained in a way where you can say, or do you say, was also this you was a plural and was referring to the Muslims, or also plural referring to the kuffar as well. So like I said, there's a lot of apologetics, but the central point that we need to take from here is, again, you can see it's the diacritical marks that were changing. Other than that, it was fine. But like I said, what's the point of adding this confusion?
I mean, I would kind of understand that that even if we just take this verse in isolation, do you say or do they say could basically mean the same thing, you know, just referring to those people. It could be speaking directly to them, or it could be speaking about them. But what exactly is the point in this variation? There's simply no point to making this variation. That's
exactly
strange.
I feel like sometimes you will feel, and a lot of times if you read these academic articles on these issues, they point out that certain readings flow better than others, and certain readings are actually grammatically sometimes more palatable than the other ones too. So then you're almost wondering, why would God do this to make one reading incorrect, or let's say less eloquent than the other one? Anyway, let's go on to the next example. Here we have another example of an omission. So in the Hafs version, Surah BAQARAH, chapter 2, verse 132, it says, وَوَصَّى بِهَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ. And in the Warsh version, it says, وَأَوْصَى. So in the Warsh version, we have an extra alif between the two waws. The meaning does not change at all, honestly. It becomes from, and Abraham enjoined his sons, to Abraham instructed his sons. It's not a big difference in meaning, but again, pointing out that this addition and discrepancy is there. Here we have Surah Al-An'am, Surah 6, verse 63, and the Warsh is on the left in this case, and Hafs is on the right. So the discrepancy here is La in anjaytana min hazi is what it says in the Warsh, anjaytana. In Hafs, it says anjana. So there is the ta and the ya that's missing from the Hafs version. Now, how does it read? And this is interesting. So Allah is telling say, who rescues you from the darkness of the land and sea when you call upon him imploring aloud and privately? And then he quotes the disbeliever saying, if you should save us from this crisis, we will surely be amongst the thankful. Whereas in the Hafs, it says, if he should save us from this crisis, we surely be among the thankful. Again, this doesn't specify if Allah is quoting a specific group of people, but it's a general flow of conversation that seems to be taking place here. So I wouldn't say that this is a conflict in meaning per se, but again, it seems that anjana and anjaytana, this discrepancy could have come from the manuscripts and again the diacritical markings.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like, it doesn't really add anything.
Yeah.
Again, this is a
Nothing of
simple
significance.
one. Surah 9, Surah Tawbah, verse 107. And the Hafs version has got an extra vowel in the beginning, which says وَالَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مَسْجِدًا ضَرَارًا, whereas the Warsh version says الَّذِينَ. So the word and is omitted from the Warsh and is present in the Hafs. So it reads, and there are those who put up a mosque by way of mischief, versus there are those who put up a mosque by way of mischief. It means the same. Again, like, what's the point of this?
There's literally nothing here that this serves, that this variation serves. There's no use of it at all. Like,
Exactly.
no one can really come here with a straight face say, well, there's obviously a reason this is here, because in this way it is much easier to read, and you know.
So here we have Surah SHURA, Surah 26, verse 217. In the Hafs version, it reads, وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى الْعَزِيزِ الرَّحِيمِ, which means, and rely upon the exalted in might, the merciful. But the Warsh, instead of the wow, it has the letter fa. So it reads فَتَوَكَّلْ, which means so rely upon, or therefore rely upon. Again, it's not a big change in meaning, but what's also interesting is the wow and the fa thing happens a few times, I believe, and it's because the vow, when written in the skeletal form, can be very close in how it's written and can be confused to be joined with the ta, and then it could be mistaken for a fa. So that is one possible explanation for this. Like I said, I'm not going deep dive and looking at where this word is found in the manuscript and seeing the skeletal structure. I'm not doing that right now in detail. It's not the point of this presentation. Here again, we have Surah Shura, Surah 42, verse 30. In the Hafs version, it reads, وَمَا أَصَابَكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُم. Whereas in the Warsh version, it reads, وَمَا أَصَابَكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُم. So the letter fa is again additional in Hafs, and it's non-existent in the Warsh. Does it change the meaning at all? No, not really, but I'll read it out for you. And whatever strikes you of disaster, then it is what your hands have earned, versus whatever strikes you of the disaster, it is of your hands what it's earned. So it's not really, again, like, it doesn't change the meaning much. Here, the meaning isn't changed, but there are a couple of letters addition. So in the Hafs, it says, ما تشتهيه. So I'll read it. وفيها ما تشتهيه الأنفس. But in the Shubha, this is not the Warsh version, by the way, just to give you an idea. There's about 5, 6, there'll be different versions that might pop up. But this one is found in Shubha, where it says ما تشتهي الأنفس. So what you see is in Hafs, you have hil at the end, whereas tashtahil, so there's a few letters missing, although the meaning doesn't change. Now again, like, why would you do that? I'm not going to get into linguistics, and some people can go into details. There are arguments, I did mention this earlier, that certain versions will be grammatically better than other ones, and we will come in one example about that too. Again, we see another instance of Surah Shams, Surah 91, verse 15, where the va and the fa is mixed up. So in the Hafs it reads وَلَا يَخَافُ عُقْبَاهَا, and Warsh it reads فَلَا يَخَافُ عُقْبَاهَا. So one is, and he does not fear the consequence thereof, and the other one is, therefore he does not fear the consequence thereof. All right. Next one, again, we have an instance of another problem with the kul and the qala. So this time it's in Surah Jinn, Surah 72. Hafs says, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَدْعُو رَبِّي وَلَا أُشْرِكْ بِهِ أَحَدًا. Whereas Warsh says, قَالَ إِنَّمَا أَدْعُو رَبِّي وَلَا أُشْرِكُ بِهِ أَحَدًا. So what's going on here is Hafs is commanding Muhammad to say the following words: I only invoke my Lord and do not associate with him anyone. Whereas the Warsh again is quoting Muhammad saying, I only invoke my Lord and do not associate with him anyone. Again, what happened first, the sequence and chronology of historical events.
Okay. So again, the same concept. One is from the perspective of Allah, one is from the perspective of Muhammad, which again makes no sense.
Yeah. And now we have Surah Mu'minun. It's Surah 23, verse 89. This is a very slight. It does not change the meaning. It's just a slight omission. And like again, you'll see what's the point. Hafs says, سَيَقُولُونَ لِلَّهِ, which means they say it belongs to Allah. Whereas the Duri, so this is another Quran. This is not Shubha, this is not Warsh, this is the Duri Riwayah. This one does not say Lillah. It has an extra alif between Sayaqulun and the Allah, and it says Sayaqulun Allah instead of Lillah. So here it says they will say Allah. So one is it saying Lillah, meaning this belongs to Allah, or it's a possessive, whereas the other one is they will say Allah.
I assume that the previous verse talks about something that belongs to Allah, and then in this, okay.
So it doesn't really affect the meaning in any crucial way. This one is like very simple example. I mean, here, because the alif is missing, that's why it was written differently in the Warsh. So Surah Ahqaf, Surah 46, verse 15. In the Hafs, it says, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ إِحْسَانًا. And it's talking about being nice to your parents. So it translates in the Hafs version as, and we have enjoined on man to his parents kindness. Whereas the word ihsana is changed to husna in Warsh, and it translates almost the same. It's like we have enjoined on man to treat his parents in a beautiful manner. So kind manner, beautiful manner. But the point is that there's just one alif missing. Now let's go to Surah Yasin, Surah 36, verse 35.
How many more of these examples do we have?
So we're almost at if we have 40 examples from the modern Qur'ans, and then we have a bunch of extreme big variants from the Sana Qur'an. Then we have a couple of hadith, and then we ended up. Okay. But we're halfway through, probably past that.
Okay.
So in the Hafs version, it says وَمَا أَمِلَتْهُ, whereas Shubha says وَمَا أَمِلَتْ. So who is an extra addition in the Hafs version, whereas Shubha doesn't exist. The translation isn't affected as bad at all. In fact, it says that they may eat of its fruit and not made it their hands, whereas Shubha says, and not made their hands. So it's a very small difference, but just pointing out that, again, the text of the Qur'ans is not identical. Now we're getting into some, so this is interesting. Now you'll see plural and singular fuges. So this is Surah Ra'd, Surah 13, verse 42. And in the Hafs version, it says, وَسَيَعْلَمُ الْكُفَّارِ. So, and in the Warsh it says, وَسَيَعْلَمُ الْكَافِرِ. So kuffar is plural and kafir is singular. How does this translate? He knows what every soul earns, and the disbelievers will know for whom is the final home. And in the Warsh it translates, he who knows what every soul earns, and the disbeliever will know for whom is the final home. So it's a singular plural thing. And you will see this happen quite a few times, actually. Again, it happens in Surah 66, verse 12. In Hafs, it says, وَصَدَقَتْ بِكَلِمَاتِ رَبِّهَا وَكُتُبِهِ وَكَانَتْ مِنَ الْقَانِتِينَ. And it says, and she believed in the words of her Lord and his books, and she was of the devoutly obedient. Whereas in the Warsh it says, kitabihi, which is one book. So it says, and she believed in the word of her Lord and his book.
So we have again we have the same letters in both versions, but we have different symbols, different signs, different vowel, and which slightly changes the meaning. So what we see here is that the Quran was in the same way preserved until a certain point, where then different diacritical symbols were added to it, which caused the Quran to be slightly corrupted from one Quran to the other, which is not supposed to happen.
There's a whole history of this caliph and his appointee Hajjaj bin Yusuf adding these marks and then changing some words around.
I made a video about that long ago.
Okay, perfect. So if you want to look at that, you can refer to that video for details.
Oh, we can definitely talk about it.
Now we get to another one. Here, this is quite interesting. In Surah Ahraf, Surah 7, verse 141, the Hafs version says, سوء العذاب يقتلون أبناءكم ويستحيون نساءكم. Whereas the Warsh version says, سوء العذاب يقتلون and يقاتلون. So their tenses are being changed. So what happens in the meaning is, and when we saved you from the people of the Pharaoh who were afflicting you with the worst of torment, they were killing your sons. So that's like a continuous tense, whereas in present, and then this one is they killed your sons. So it just changes the tense.
Okay.
The meaning isn't affected as bad. But again, so we'll go through one more example of. I think people get the point, so I'll just speed through these last examples.
There are just a lot of variations that happen because of the signs used. So these are a lot of examples.
We have 21:104, and the half size that says كتي السجل للكتب, whereas Warsh says kitab, and Allah's talking about rolling up the heavens at the day of judgment. And one place he says, the day we roll up the heavens like a scroll rolled up for books in plural sense. And the other verse says scroll rolled up for a book. So like a singular plural. Let's go to the next one. And this one was weird, where I did read that one of the versions is grammatically correct and the other one isn't. Like I said, I'm not going to comment too much on that, but I did leave on the side from Corpus Quran, the word by word, which shows, if anybody's interested, what's happening here. Is salawatak, it says, is a second person masculine singular possessive pronoun, and it gets changed to salawatik. So why everything else seems to be identical in the verses, it's just that this thing changes. And like I said earlier, people will point out, and scholars will point out, that some versions of the verses flow better in a grammatical sense. Now, this one's interesting too. When Surah BAQARAH, chapter 2, verse 165, Hafs says, وَلَوْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا, whereas Warsh says, وَلَوْ تَرَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا. And it does change the meaning slightly. So here it is. And if only they who have wronged would consider that when they see the punishment. Okay? Versus it says, and if only they who have wronged would consider that when you see the punishment. So verse, it doesn't, it's again, the tara and the yara are exactly identical. It's like the dot put on top versus the dot put on bottom. Completely change the perspective who's being addressed here. So yara is like they, when then tara is like you. Now we're this one is from Surah.
Can we proceed to the thing is, I think and we see that there is obviously a lot of discrepancy in certain verses with certain letters and certain symbols.
We'll go to the manuscripts.
Can we proceed to major ones?
Yeah.
So then go ahead to
I'll just quickly show these slides and then move on. يرونهم ترونهم 3:13 Warsh Hafs يدخله ندخله Surah 48:17 Ahzab. This is interesting. Hafs says kabira, Warsh says kathira. One means great, one means multitude or abundant. In Surah Hijr, one says nunazzil in verse 8, and Warsh says tanazzal. So we do not send down angels, you do not send down the angels. Surah BAQARAH, chapter 2, verse 85, it says, Ta'malun, you do, Ya'malun, they do. Nunshizuha, Surah BAQARAH 2:259, we raise them, or it says, Nunshiruha, we revive them. نغفر لكم يغفر لكم 2 to 58 is Surah Baqarah. We will forgive, and versus He will forgive. This one, Surah Ma'idah chapter 5 verse 54, again one of the grammatical ones. One says Jartadda and one is Jartadid minkum, means the same. Surah Imran chapter 3 verse 81, Haf says Ataytukum and Warsh says Ataynakum. Didn't change the meaning here as much. Surah Nisa chapter 4 verse 152, it says Yutihim in Hafs, and Warsh says Nuktihim, we give, versus he is going to give. This one is important. I'll just spend 2 seconds here. Is meaning changes here. Surah 3 verse 146. The Hafs says وَكَأَيٍّ مِّن نَبِيٍّ قَاتَلَ مَعَهُ, versus Warsh says وَكَأَيٍّ مِّن نَبِيٍّ قُتِلَ مَعَهُ. So one says how many of Prophet fought with him, versus the other one says how many of Prophet were killed. So this is a problem as well. Did they fight and they died, or you can also say the fighting entailed the killing. Here we have another interesting one where Surah Baqarah chapter 2 verse 9 is starts with yukhadi'un Allah, but then switches to yakhda'un Allah. The same phrase occurs in this verse twice, whereas the Warsh version sticks with the same word, both occurrences, yukhadi'un Allah, yukhadi'un illa anfusihim. Now the translation does change. It says they seek to deceive Allah and those who believe, but they deceive not except themselves. Where it says they seek to deceive Allah and those who believe, but they seek to deceive not except themselves. This is a small variant and meaning change here. Now we are at the juicy part. And what I want you to know, that if you thought that those discrepancies and variants were of any value, we're going to go from, let's say, from a 0 to 100 now. You're about to see whole phrases versus omitted words being moved around, sequences change and whatnot. So without further ado, I'm going to start. Okay. This is the Sana Quran. Just to briefly describe, it's a palimpsest. What happened was it had a lower text, which was erased, and an upper text written, which is what some people said the Osmanic Quran. Over time, the ink popped up, and you can extract the lower text using UV lights, and we can read what was in the lower text. Now, the lower text has variants that confirm to a lot of reported companion codices, and these are major variants. So without further ado, we'll analyze these two papers. One is the Codex of a Companion of Prophet, and the other one, Sana 1, and yours in the Quran. It was written by professors and academics from Stanford and Harvard University. I have personally talked with them once or twice, but let's get into it. So on the left side, this is where it gets crazy. So on the left side, you will see the description of the variant, and from now on, we will refer to the lower text of Sana as C1. So the standard text of the tradition in Quran chapter 2 verse 196 reads, "Do not shave your heads until the offering reaches its destination." The lower text says, "Do not shave until the offering reaches its destination." So the whole word "ra'usakum" is missing. In the same verse, the standard text says, "If any of you be sick," but the lower text reads, "Should any of you be sick?" Meaning that the lower text has فَإِنْ كَانَ أَحَدٌ instead of the standard فَمَنْ كَانَ This is the same verse again. It says the standard text, fasting or alms or an offering, whereas the lower text only says fasting or an offering. It doesn't mention the word أو صدقة. So there's that omission. Now, we see the similar omission where a word C1, the lower text, has wal akhirat instead of the standard hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan. In chapter 63 verse 7, we see in the standard text of the Quran it's that they may disperse, yanfaddu, but in the lower text there's additional phrase yanfaddu min hawlihi. Okay, now on the right side, if you go to table 4, you can see where the C1 lower text will actually agree with narrations recounting companion codices and their variants. They're recorded in books like Kitab al-Masahif, Suyuti's Itqan, and Al-Fahrist. Just to give you one additional point, that Kitab al-Masahif is the book that Yasir Qadi did mention in his emails by name that were leaked in 2016, saying that just a cursory reading of the book leads one to question the standard narrative of the Quran. So we'll keep going. What we see is that in the Osmanic Quran, in verse chapter 2, verse 217, it says قِتَالٍ فِيهِ. C1 says أَنْقِتَالٍ فِيهِ. But what's the next one is very important. This is where the whole verses structure is being changed around, and we can see that. And what we see is in Surah 2, verse 222, it says فَاتَزِلُ النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيدِ وَلَا تَقْرَبُهُنَّ حَتَّى يَتَحَّرْنَ. Whereas in C1, it says فَلَا تَقْرَبُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيدِهِنَّ حَتَّى يَتَحَّرْنَ. There's a huge omission here, and the verses are not the same. The phrases are moving around. And you can see that on the right side, it's telling that it actually matches with a companion reported codex. Now we'll go more again, and we see that in Surah 5, verse 45 in the Osmanic text, we read وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ, whereas in C1, the lower text, read وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل, so which means we enjoin upon them versus we enjoin upon the people of Israel, right? Again, we talked about the Yanfaddu example, so we're going to go to table number 6, and now we're getting into major elements. And here we see type of difference and word order. So the word is changed where it occurs in the verse completely. In chapter 5, verse 41, وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ is the Osmanic reading. The C1 reads وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ لَهُمْ. Okay. Then in 2:196, it says in the Osmanic text istaysara, but in C1 it says tayassara. Then ta'muruna ya'muruna in 1565. And this one's interesting as well. In Surah 5, verse 43, it says in the Osmanic text al-nabiyuna, whereas the C1 has a different plural, which sounds better, ANBIYA. Then in Surah 2, verse 29, al-ayati, and singular al-ayat and al-ayat. So it's a singular plural change. Then there's a verb tense or mood change in 5:552. Fayusbihu is in Osmanic text. Fayusbihuna is in the C1. And again, we see an active to passive change in Surah 5, verse 47. Osman says, Anzalallahu fihi. C1 reads, Unzila alayhim fihi. It's very different sounding. It's again, now one starts to question, okay, so we can see there's a lot of interpolation going on. So let's keep going. And what I'm trying to show right now, we're in the minor major. Let's say they're limited to a few phrases. In a few slides, we will go to the huge omissions and additions where chunks are added in verses, okay?
I think the problem here is, Abdullah, the Quran alone is a book that is very hard to listen to, and it is very hard to listen to, very hard to sit there and take that in. You know, it's like I remember people in mosques listening to the Quran just falling asleep and getting so bored. It is horrible. I mean, I remember myself completely getting into this sweet sleep mode, even when I was in my most religious moment, when I was so passionate about the Quran. I was just getting into this sweet sleep mode that I was trying to resist because it's inappropriate to sleep while the Quran is being recited and you have to stay awake. So I don't know. We have a lot of issues here. We see that not only the Quran itself is a very hard to read book that is definitely not appealing to an average person. We also see that in the revelation of the Quran, there's a lot of stuff that has been really going wrong. There is obviously a lot of proof to that, a lot of examples to that here.
I'm gonna quickly speed through because, like you said, nobody wants to hear me recite the Arabic over and over. So I'll pick up a few examples.
I think everybody wants to hear you, and I think people are also here for your mustache, especially. But
okay.
I think people would be a little bit bored from listening to the whole Quran variants, to be very honest.
Okay. So what we'll do is let's pick out. We've talked about these verses before, but what I'm showing now is when the Arabic is written next to each other, the impact, and then you see how much of an interpolation and verse changing is happening. So if you can see on the left side, in the top left corner here, we're talking about the Osmanic, min siyamin aw sudaqatin aw nusuk. This is what's in the manuscript, min siyamin aw nusuk. So you can see similar case, a lot of interpolation here. Baghiyam bainahum is omitted. It's not existent in the manuscript. الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. So the word خَلَوْ is not existent in the manuscript and lower text as well. In 2:17, كفر به وكفر به, the whole phrase وكفر به does not exist in the lower text. In Surah 2, verse 217, يردوكم عن دينكم. يردوكم is omitted again in the lower text. In Surah 2:18, in Osman it says إن الذين آمنوا والذين هاجروا وجاهدوا, whereas in C1 it says إن الذين آمنوا وهاجروا. The jahadu is omitted. Now what we're going to get to in a little bit after the omissions is the insertions. So we have a few more here. So the word bi'izni is not found in the manuscripts in the Sana Quran lower text in verse 2:1. Then we just talked about the sentence structure completely being flipped around in this verse in Surah BAQARAH chapter 2 verse 222 about menstruation, and this is very interesting. So I'll read the actual version. فَأْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ وَلَا تَقْرَبُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَتَطَهَّرْنَ, whereas the omission is فَأْتَزِلُوا, and the sentence structure changes. فَلَا تَقْرَبُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي مَحِيضِهِنَّ حَتَّى يَتَطَهَّرْنَ. So it's a completely different sentence structure. We already saw that the فَحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ is completely omitted in 552 and 554. The nas is omitted. What we will go to is now the next one. Actually, in 63:1, the word qalu is actually not found in the manuscript as well in the lower text. Now we're going to the additions. So this is where they're adding. We find additional parts of phrases in the lower text that are not found in the Osmanic Quran. And there's if you want, I'm going to go through this fast, but stop and read the comments of the scholar here, because they will point out some very peculiar instances where the occurrence of the phrase would be expected in a certain way, but will occur differently because a different scribe was writing it. And if a different scribe is writing it, he's not familiar with a certain reading and whatnot. It's a very interesting, if you want to read it, it's amazing. So anyways, in Surah 2, verse 193, the Osmanic Quran reads وَيَكُونَ الدِّينَ لِلَّهِ, that all religions for Allah. But there's the addition of the word كُلُّهُ وَيَكُونَ الدِّينَ كُلُّهُ لِلَّهِ in the lower text. And then we already talked about those verses. So in 544, this one is actually quite interesting. This is actually quite significant, the addition here. The normal text read الذين هادوا والربانيون والأحبار بما استحفظوا من كتب الله وكانوا عليه شهيدا. And additional phrases here are والذين هم يحكمون بما نزل الله فيها يحكم به. This is a huge chunk added into it in the lower text. I can't read it because there's a lot of appearances and stuff. We already talked about وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل. The phrase Bani Israel is additional in the lower text. Now here we see in...
So there's actually a good amount of words added
it's a lot of
the text. That's very... So
Yeah.
this is beyond just little changes, little variations in letters and symbols. You see that there is a lot of text actually added here to the original text of the Quran. So.
And what's also fascinating is you see the evolution of the canonization process with this, because you can see how the Quran was and how it evolved and how it came to its final form. So one on this side here, it says in the Osmanic Quran in Surah 63 verse 3, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ آمَنُوا ثُمَّ كَفَرُوا, whereas in the lower text there's an additional phrase ثُمَّ ازْدَادُوا كُفْرًا. And then in the same verse, it says that in the Osmanic Quran, it says ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ... كَتَبَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ كَتَبَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ فَهُمْ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. Sorry if I can't, it's very tiny. And in the lower text, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ is additional. It's completely added. It's not just one word. It's like a good four word phrase. We talked about min hawlihi. There's an additional word in the lower text, well, izzatu jami'a in 63:8. Again, more additions on the left side. We talked about 2196 before, about what they're going to talk about here, substitution. And this is very important because many scholars have in the past written books and books saying that you cannot even imagine to change a word or substitute it with a synonym because you'll be lying upon Allah. Okay? Now, what you see here is another instance of just that. So in Surah 2, verse 196, like the Osmanic Quran reads, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا, whereas it says it's أَحَدًا man, it changes, فَإِنْ كَانَ أَحَدًا مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا. So they've substituted one phrase. Then another one in Surah 209, جَاءَكُمُ الْهُدَى جَاءَكُمُ الْبَيِّنَاتِ, meaning proof versus evidence and signs and guidance. The point, what you can see is, it's also interesting, what I want to point out is you can see literally every type of variant. You don't just see small, you see small, large, meaning, you see omissions, additions, substitutions, interpolation, tense changes. Like it's every type of variant is there. So to argue at this point that this book is perfectly preserved becomes unsustainable.
So there is really, I mean, as you can clearly see, there really is a big hole in the narrative. Yeah. There is a major hole. Abdullah, some people have been asking, like, if I want to look at this in detail, is there a way I can find? Is there like a PDF or something I can find on this? Is there something accessible that I could add to the description of this video?
Sure. So what I'll do is, after the stream is over, I'll give you the link to both the papers so people can access them and read this all. What I was also going to do was, I was going to make this PDF available, like this presentation available for anybody to download, so they can reference it and look into it and read. So that would be a good way to look into it. But there are, like I said, lots of books written on it, and it is a very deep topic. Anyways,
fantastic.
We see this huge addition. I'll just go to a couple of substitutions. In Surah 2, verse 113, Osman says Fabas, and Sivan says Fa'arsal. 546, نورا مصدقا لما بين يديه من التوراة نورا ومصدقا لما أنزلنا من التوراة. So there's a بين يدي is standing for أنزلنا is revealing. So in للمتقين is substituted لقوم يؤمنون or يؤتنون. أنزل الله is substituted with أوحي الله. وإذا رأيتهم وإذا جاءوا. And then like these are even, and then these are the one word even more major changes you can read. I'm not going to go through all of them. It's too much at this point. One should know that the point should be clear that there are extensive variants in every level of, or let's say every level of the Quranic preservation narrative has some form of flaw in it. But you can see that there's a bunch of interpolation, word changes and stuff going on here. And on the left side again, on the right side. And now we are coming to the minor ones here. I'm just going to skip through them because we've gone through enough minor ones in the modern Qurans.
So basically there are a lot of variations in the Quran, and it is really endless. There are so many, there are numerous examples. Yeah.
So once we finish the manuscripts, now what I want to get to is this phase shows that the Quranic text evolved, and up till Uthman, there were codices by companions that had variations to a great extent. And just to give you an idea of the extent of variation, if you were to read Kitab al-Masahif, I hear Ubay had, I think, 2 extra Surah Khal and Surah Hafd in it. And then like Ibn Masud had omitted certain things, and then a lot of the variants match. The lower text variants match the variants reported in Kitab al-Masahif, which gives credence to the idea that yes, indeed, there were companion codices available. Now, once we got into that, now we're going to go into the Hadith part, where we'll analyze how many verses of the Quran were cancelled or lost, and that Muhammad himself forget verses, and the Sahaba were fighting amongst each other, and then there was the book burning. So we'll go through and we'll show you that the compilation process of the Quran itself is so flawed and has so much infighting going on that to assert that it is on itself the committee appointed by Osman did anything to perfectly preserve the Quran, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So let's start with this first hadith we have here from Sahih al-Bukhari. This quickly recounts that there were differences in recitation in the Quran. As now we have seen what those differences were, now we can come back and connect those things. Now will start making sense to you, keeping in mind the extent of the variance, why Uthman burnt the Quran. So he makes this copy and whatnot, and then he says to write it in the dialect of the Quraysh, right? And he takes the manuscript from Hafsa, and gist of it is that he burns all the copies of the Quran, and even fragmentary manuscripts that don't agree with his were burned. So why did Osman burn the Quran? We know now because the variation was so extensive, he had to take drastic measures. Now we see that. Sorry, go ahead.
I guess you kind of pointed it out, and you would like to point it out in, further. But Uthman is a very important figure in Islamic history, and especially in the history of Muhammad. And what happens here is that he clearly notices that there are major discrepancies in between the variations of the Quran, and what he orders is to unify it and to only leave one single version of it, to collect all the others and to burn them. And up until this time, it was probably not even you can get to the detail of that, but you see, this is basically similar to what Yasir Qadhi said recently, which is that that there are major holes in the narrative regarding the preservation of the Quran. If you talk publicly about these things, if you really talk to the average person about these things, these things cause major doubts in the minds of people. And the average Muslim apologist doesn't have a proper way to explain these things away, which is why they don't want the average person to speak about it, which is why Uthman wanted the Quran versions to be burned and there to be only one issue left. If this was such a minor issue, if this was such a simple thing, such a very simple problem that you can just easily explain and easily just brush off, and there is nothing much important about that, then they would just do that. They would just have simple explanations to these. But obviously they're trying to hide it, they're trying to censor it, they're trying to delete parts of videos because they openly spoke about these things, which happened on Muhammad Hijab's channel. And this is really crucial, and the average Muslim should really sit down and think, why is this happening? Why don't Islamic apologists have very easily understandable explanations to these? Why don't they trust the average Muslim? Why don't they let us look at these variations and just understand them and move on, if this is not such a big deal? Why are even they making this such a huge deal? Because it is a big deal, because this completely discredits the Quran.
Yeah. Now, one thing I want to point out here is not only the Quran has discrepancies at the level of modern Qurans, we see that it has discrepancy at the manuscript levels. Mm-hmm. We are now seeing that the Sahaba had discrepancies in infighting, and they're burning the book. While we're coming back to Muhammad, and how many verses that used to be in the Quran no longer exist. So look at this. Surah Ahzab, which is chapter 33, had over 200 verses, and now it only has 73 verses. So there's about some hundreds of verses that were part of this surah that were gone. They're lost. They were apparently canceled and abrogated. But the whole concept of abrogation even makes the ahruf and qira'ah even worse, and the hole becomes even bigger. It becomes a black hole at that point. So what we see here, there's this hadith is being narrated in literally so many books. What it says is, Ubay bin Ka'b is one of the big reciters of the Quran, said to me, how long is Surah Ahzab when you read it? How many verses do you think it is? I said to him, 73. He said, only there was a time when it was as long as Surah Al-Baqarah, that's chapter 2, the longest chapter in the Quran. And then he says, and he read in it the ayah, the verse of the stoning. The old man and the old woman, if they commit zina, stone them both, a punishment from Allah. This verse also is no longer found in the Quran. Ibn Hazm says that this is a clearly Sahih Isnad. It is as clear as the sun, which has no fault in it. If you keep reading, Ibn Kathir says similar things as well. But at this point, you're like, okay, this surah is missing hundreds of verses. And this hadith has been recorded in literally every part. And that's what I'm saying. This is the problem. What happened was, so a lot of these companions would still keep the abrogated verses in their codices. And there's hadiths where Ubay bin Ka'b would, Umar said that Ubay recites stuff that he takes from the mouth of the Messenger of Allah, but we do not put that in the manuscript and act upon it because it's been cancelled. But then there were discrepancies where Ibn Masud and Ubay would say, even if the verses are cancelled, we are not going to give up our manuscripts. We want to keep those cancelled verses in there. So this brings another layer of doubt on the Quranic preservation. Moving on now, what I want you to see here is the extent of disagreement in the Sahaba. Okay, to the point where Abdullah ibn Mas'ud did not like Zayd bin Sabit, the guy appointed by Uthman the Caliph to copy the Mus'haf. And he was so mad that he said to the people, "O you Muslim people, I am removed from the recording of the transcription of the Mus'haf, as it is overseen by a man by Allah. When I accepted Islam, he was but in the loins of a disbelieving man." So Ibn Mas'ud is saying, don't listen to Zayd bin Sabit. He was in the loins of a disbelieving man when I was hearing the Quran from the mouth of the Prophet. And then Abdullah bin Mas'ud says, "O people of Iraq, keep the masahif that are with you and conceal them. For indeed Allah has said, whoever conceals something, he shall come with what he concealed on the day of judgment. So meet Allah with the masahif." Az-Zuhri said, it was conveyed to me that some men amongst the most virtuous of the companions of the Messenger disliked that view of Ibn Mas'ud.
So am I understanding this right here, Abdullah? Am I understanding this right here? So we have a Quran. We have the Quran that is revealed at a time by Muhammad through revelations that he receives from Gabriel, and that he speaks to his people, to his scribes, and to people who memorize what he says. And up until a certain point, long after Muhammad's death, we have a compilation of verses and chapters that people have on their minds and in their books, in their manuscripts. Yet there comes a time when a specific authority takes over the task to unify the Quran, and this person directly invalidates specific versions of the Quran in which a lot of verses are contained that he is against and that he doesn't want in the actual single unified Quran any longer. And that angers somebody who was a scribe and who was someone who listens to Muhammad so much that he says, what the hell, I was there when Muhammad spoke this, and I was there and I recorded this must be part of the Quran. How can you say it's not part of the Quran? And yet we are left with this specific figure taking the authority and presenting us with a Quran that misses certain verses that were meant to be in the Quran according to Muhammad. So that is what is happening here. The Quran that we have in our hands, the Quran that I'm having in our hands, is actually missing things that Muhammad said, that people heard and that people wrote down. And yet we are being told that the Quran has been revealed at once by Allah, perfectly planned, perfectly reserved, without any human intervention. Here it is. And this is a completely authentic narration that we are seeing in front of us.
Yeah, it's from Jama Tirmidhi. Now what we're going to go to is now I'm going to just quickly go through some verses that used to be in the Quran and they no longer exist. So there was the suckling verses. There's 10 sucklings, and it was abrogated. Another verse with 5 clear sucklings, that was gone, and now it's no longer found in the Quran anymore again, right? So again, a few problems here. Now there's this other verse. Here's the one thing you got to notice. A lot of times the abrogation doesn't make sense, whereas some verses will be having just a spiritual content, and they'll be canceled out, and their cancellation or their inclusion in the text doesn't really change much. So why the hell are you making these changes? And sometimes what happens is, for example, the stoning, right? Why would Allah cancel and remove the verse but preserve the practice?
I always wondered about that.
Also keep the prior verses that were canceled in the Quran, but the one he has to ask us to act upon is not found in the Quran. So when you think about this, a lot of these things don't make sense, and half the time these abrogations are so useless. But here we see another thing, and this guy says, we used to recite a chapter which resembled in length and severity to that of Surah Baqarah chapter 9. I have, however, forgotten it with the exception of this, which I remember out of it. If there were 2 valleys full of riches for sons of Adam, he would long for a 3rd valley, and nothing will fill the stomach of son of Adam but dust. This was apparently part of the Quran, and there was a big surah, and it's like surah 9, just to give a reference, is 100, almost 200 verses. So there was another surah that had this. So we don't only have Surah Ahzab, there's another surah that went missing. This recounts the same story on the right side, so we'll move to the next one. Now, we talked about the worst of the stoning of adulterers, and the point that I raised was even Umar ibn Khattab is so concerned that because it's not written down in the Musaf, people will forget about it. And he's like, I wish I could have put it in. And then he tells us what the worst actually once was. Al-shaykhu wal-shaykhu iza zayyan zaniya farjumuhuma. So, and if an old man and an old woman commit adultery, stone them both.
So we see that there is a Quran verse. Why am I echoing? I don't know why I'm hearing echo. But so we see that there is a Quran verse which has a very explicit, a very clear hudud order, which in Islam stands for a punishment or an order that was directly ordained by Allah, by Islam, which is to stone adulterers. We see that this verse is removed from the Quran and is subject of an abrogation. So the original content of the Quran is changed, but the order to stone adulterers is still part of Islam. It still has been part of Islam for over 1,000 years, and that's what Islamic jurisprudence always went by. So it really doesn't make sense. I have always wondered why was it even abrogated? I mean,
exactly.
What
makes even less sense is initially the punishment for women for having 4 witnesses and being proven that they committed adultery was to put them in their houses till they die. And this was, I think, in Surah Nisa, verse 15, if I'm correct. But then what happened was the women are like, well, we'll just stay in our houses and we can keep doing dinner. So some people were like, yeah, we can, we got to change it. So then the flogging was introduced, right? But then there was the stoning verse. So the stoning verse canceled out the flogging verse in a certain sense. And then also the pushing women into their houses till they die. But the cancel verses are still part of the Quran, but the verse we need to follow isn't part of the Quran. It makes no sense.
So I'm sorry, what this looks like to me is there was an order in the original Quran, which was to punish people by just confining them into their homes. Then Muslims further thought this doesn't really work, so they made up the rule to flog people. And then maybe Muhammad even died, and they made a rule up about or a Quran verse about stoning people who commit adultery. But then they thought, oh, this shouldn't be part of the Quran. We shouldn't put this in the Quran, so they didn't put it in the Quran. Although they still continued this practice because they were rough and barbaric people who thought that should be a good punishment, and yet they couldn't put it into the Quran, and yet the law has been followed by Muslims forever. So. I know a Muslim should really sit down and ask himself, like, what the hell is happening here? What went wrong in Islamic history?
The Quranic preservation is slowly turning into a massive black hole at this point.
It's funny.
Again, it's just a quick, I'll go over this. Like I said earlier, there's verses that were revealed where the verse used to recite, inform our people that we have met our Lord, he's pleased with us and he has made us pleased. And later on, this Quranic verse was canceled. The hadith on the right says the same thing. Again, why was this verse canceled? I mean, it doesn't really change anything if it's included or not.
It makes no sense.
This is an interesting one. So there's many hadith about this. There's a verse in the Quran, 2-38, where it says, "Hafizu ala salawati was salatil wusta." But Aisha said that there's an extra phrase in here, and she added the phrase wa salatul asr. Wa qumu lillahi qanitin, I think is how it ends. But what we see here again is why is this phrase initially added but then removed? And if you actually go into the detail of this thing, you will then have Sahabas in Hadith and Tafsir say, oh, but the Salatul Wusta referred to Salatul Asr, so Salatul Asr was removed because it was redundant. So it's that too. Let's go on to this other one. And now this is an interesting one. The current Quran has the Syrian reading as per this hadith. The current Quran reads, وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى. This story is that there was a Sahabi that went to Syria and he asked for somebody who could recite like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And then he asked, how do you recite Surah Layl, Surah 92, Layli iza yaghsha? And the guy said that I heard him recite, Layli iza yaghsha. They skip the second verse because it's a given, it's there. But Zakari wal untha. So he skips Wama khalaqa part. Then Abu Darda said, by Allah, this is how I heard the Messenger of Allah reciting it. But these people want me to recite it, Wama khalaqa, but I will not follow them. So now we have a hadith that is saying that the Quran you see right now is not what should be part of it.
So what we have here again, dear Muslim listeners, is that clearly the Muslims after Muhammad are arguing with each other on how to read a Quran, on what the actual text of the Quran is, although we have always learned that the Quran was directly revealed by Allah through weird states of revelation to Muhammad in a perfect way. So I'll leave that to you.
So just there's a few hadith about this as well. Muhammad also admitted in the Quran verse it says that Muhammad used to forget the Quran. Aisha reported the Messenger of Allah listened to the recitation of the Quran by a man in the mosque. Thereupon he said, may Allah have mercy upon him. He reminded me of the verse which I had been made to forget.
Made to forget.
Well, they think like Allah will make you forget, like they have to have the supernatural because they have to justify the abrogation, cancellation. So a lot of the abrogated, here's the thing, a lot of the abrogated verses were so lost that people just forgot them, right? So now he's thinking, okay, if I forgot the verses, I need to make an excuse. Oh, I'll reveal a verse that in the Quran says Allah will make you forget the Quran. And then it'll replace it with new ones. There you go, problem solved.
Yeah. Sorry, my dog is really bothering me. He's asking for a lot of affection for some reason tonight. He's getting really noises. Don't we have a Quran verse about it, or we have several Quran verses, right? In which the Quran itself says something like, it responds to critics because critics are accusing Muhammad of making things up or of saying things in a different way or of inventing new things, and then the Quran responds to them and says, if we cause a verse to be forgotten, we replace it with a better, more beautiful verse or something like that. So the Quran actually directly addresses this issue and tries to make excuses for that.
Yeah, there's two verses on abrogation in the Quran itself. I think Surah 2 verse 106 is one of them. I can't remember the other one. So we're almost at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
But this will show you, these two hadith, that how Muhammad is making stuff up as he went along. So on the left side we see, just to realize here, one thing to take home is how literalistic and, let's say, the Sahaba were. And so you see this, Allah reveal a verse that talks about when to stop eating when you're starting your fast, right? So the verse the initial revelation read, and eat and drink until the white thread appears to you distinct. Now, from the black thread, Allah is metaphorically talking about the light in the sky, okay? But initially, the verse did not have the phrase of dawn in it. So what ended up happening was these Sahabis, they were literalistic to such an extent, they actually started tying threads to their legs. And then they would be eating and then be looking out and like, oh yeah, I can see the black now and the white now. Oh, stop eating. I'm not joking. And that's why Allah was like, oh no, I need to make an addendum to this verse to clarify what it actually meant. So he revealed an additional phrase, of dawn.
These are the people we are supposed to take knowledge and wisdom from. So
now on the right side, a similar occurrence happened. This one's hilarious. So to summarize, a verse is revealed, not equal are those of the believers who sit at home. Okay, and then Muhammad's like, hey, call this guy to bring something to write it down. So Muhammad tells him to write down the verse. Okay, now he doesn't notice that there's a blind man sitting behind Muhammad. and he hears the verse, and he says, "O Prophet, I'm blind." So what about him? Because the verse says, "Not equal are those believers who sit at home." So then Muhammad's like, oh, I forgot to mention the disabled people. So then he says, with an addendum again, so there was revealed in place of that verse, the verse, "Not equal are those of the believers who sit at home, except those who are disabled." So here we see that Muhammad had a revelation, and then this guy's like, "Hey, what about blind people or disabled people?" It's like, "Oh, I forgot. I'll add this to it." Like,
yeah. So Muhammad is standing there, and he's having a revelation from Allah, because Allah is currently revealing verses to him and about something very important, which is that you should go and fight, because never could be the person who fights and the person who doesn't fight be the same. And then someone is behind him and says, "But I can't fight, I'm disabled, what about me?" And then he's like, "Oh, Allah also says except the disabled ones." And then the guy is like, "Oh, good, thank you, Allah." Yeah.
I mean, yeah, quite literally that's what happened. So this is now the last slide I'm going to show you. And just before we get to that last slide, I'm about to tell you something very important. You are about to see the Muslim defense, the save it all card. After this whole presentation, seeing variants on every level of the Quran and problems at every part and of the narrative and every step of the standard narrative, we now get to what Muslims propagate as the save it all, to make sense of all of this, is this hadith. So let's read it together. So narrated Umar ibn Khattab, I heard Hisham bin Hakim bin Hizam reciting Surah Al-Furqan in a way different to that of mine. Allah's Messenger had taught it to me in a different way, so I was about to quarrel with him during the prayer. Justify this is Omar, so just read what happens next. But I waited till he finished. Then I tied his garment around his neck and seized him by it and brought him to the Messenger of Allah. So Omar has this guy and he's dragging him to Muhammad and said, "I have heard him recite Surah Al-Furqan in a different way to the way you taught it to me. The Prophet ordered me to release him and asked Hisham to recite it. He recited it and Allah said it was revealed this way. Then he asked me to recite it and I recited it and he said it was revealed in this way too. The Quran has been revealed in 7 different ways, so recite in the way that is easier for you." That is what the Muslim position is, to make sense of all of these discrepancies and variants, that Allah revealed it in 7 ways.
So think about it. Very simply, think about it. Let's allow, for example, for 1 second, for 1 moment, the notion that Muhammad might have just made everything up. And of course, because he made things up, he said things differently to different people, because he's making up things from his memory and he can't always perfectly remember the things that he says, which is why he says something in a certain way to this guy and in a different way to this other guy. Now, Muslims say that the Quran was perfectly preserved and perfectly revealed, and it has been the Quran did exist before the existence of time, and it will exist until the end of time, or forever. It will exist forever. So we would now, as critics of Islam, come out and say, well, if there are 2 versions of the Quran, if there are discrepancies between the Qurans, there are 2 different versions, they obviously read differently. Doesn't this mean that the Quran wasn't actually, perfectly revealed and perfectly preserved? So we could then point out, this is actually one proof, one piece of evidence that Muhammad was a liar and that Muhammad did make up things as he went along. But what would Muslims say then? They would say, well, let's ask Muhammad. What does Muhammad say about this? And what Muhammad says is, well, there are 7 different kinds of Islam, of the Quran, and just recite it the way you like it. And Muslims come and say, see, our Prophet already answered the question. Great. So you would normally, looking at this from a very reasonable perspective, find a flaw in this, a hole in the narrative, and say this clearly shows that Muhammad was inconsistent and that Muhammad made things up. But a Muslim has to believe in Islam. It has to believe that Muhammad was perfect, has to believe that Muhammad was always inspired by Allah, which is why the Muslim will not accept your criticism and will simply accept a very terrible excuse that Muhammad makes as a clear explanation that your evidence is invalidated because Muhammad already had an explanation to it. Although the explanation makes no sense, because there is really no point for the Quran to be written and recited in different ways, in 7 different ways, which based on comfort. There is really no point for that to happen. The Quran is being recited in all kinds of cultures all around the world today, and you can recite it in one way, and it completely makes sense in that way. There is no point for that to differ from person to person or from people to people.
So what's interesting is that there is such a huge difference of opinion on what the ahruf is, because like you said, it's so vague, right? So there's about 40 different opinions of Islamic scholars on what the ahruf are, right? So they vary. So some say that the ahruf, the 7, isn't actually the number 7. It's actually a metaphor used in the Arabic language, 770, 700, to show abundance, variation. So then you're like, okay, well, if there's not a set number, then how many variants do exist? Like I said, 7, 10, 14, 36. There's no objective measure. And remember that the Quran never stipulates variance in its own text. It's always externally used, right? Now then, a lot of the problems occur is, okay, are the ahruf equivalent or interchangeable with the qira'at, yani the riwayas of the Quran, meaning the different readers who transmitted the Quran? So some people will say, no, the qira'at and the ahruf are different, okay? So then you ask, okay, well, are the ahruf dialects, or do they also encompass the textual variants? Do they encompass the textual variants that exist in the post-Uthmanic modern Qur'ans, or do they encompass also the companion codices that were found in the lower text of Sana, right? So once you start thinking about it, it completely crumbles. The thing it cannot make sense. Because every angle you look at it, if you try to fit this ahruf into one aspect, problems emerge in the other aspect of the preservation narrative, right? Now, what's also important is the theology of it and how it ties into that. So like we were talking about earlier, Allah has a corresponding copy of the Quran in heaven, according to the Quran, in Lawh Mahfuz, Kitab. Now I'm seriously, after all this evidence, I'm confused. Okay, does that Quran up in heaven have the modern Quran variants? Did it have the companion codices? That it still have the abrogated, cancelled verses? If it's the eternal speech of Allah, does that mean that the cancelled verses now somehow unbecome the eternal speech of Allah? There are so many questions, and at this point, at the end of it, when you think about this, it is very clear that this hadith is most probably, this ahruf hadith, was most probably concocted a few decades or a century later after Muhammad as a post hoc rationalization, because the Muslims started realizing, oh shit, we got to find an explanation. And they came up with this, and it was purposefully left vague. And what's interesting is even Muhammad Hijab on his Twitter said that the concept of ahruf makes the Quran preservation claim unfalsifiable, right? And if you say that, then it's just an article of faith. You're saying that you're not gonna accept any of it. You can show them any variant to any extent, and they'll say, "Oh, it's the ahruf." Right.
So that's what I'm saying. When you would look at it critically, and you would say, well, this is clear proof that there is a discrepancy, a flaw in the whole narrative, that the Quran was perfectly preserved, but the Muslim simply refers to a tradition, to a report that emerged 100 years after Muhammad died, which says, well, there are different variations of the Quran, and the Muslim simply brings up that and says, well, even if there are discrepancies between the versions of the Quran, there is already an explanation to that, which is that there are different kinds of the Quran that simply serve to read it more comfortably. So you really can't make sense of it. You really cannot defeat the Muslim position, the Muslim apologetics, by simply bringing up a very a very simple criticism, completely based on common sense, which proves that it simply doesn't work. And that's why, I mean, from the beginning, I was trying to point out that the Quran's claim is that it is the speech of God, of Allah. It is the word of God, of Allah, that it coexisted with Allah. I mean, there were even, if you want to go back into the theological discussions of Islam in the first centuries, there was so much controversy going on because people were fighting each other. Islamic scholars were fighting each other over whether the Quran was created by Allah through His speech or whether it was uncreated and always existed with Allah. So that is still to a certain extent a major discussion in Islam. But what you get from it is that it is a fundamental teaching, a fundamental doctrine of Islam, a fundamental claim of Islam, that the Quran, which we read, is something that belongs to Allah, that belongs to Allah's eternity, that has always existed with Him, and that will always exist with Him up there in his giant major book. So when you read the Quran, when I open this book and read its letters, then I'm directly reading. I'm reading directly a copy of what Allah has with Himself. But if these Quran books have differences, if these have letter differences, symbol differences, if they have differences in how much in verse numbers, if entire verses, entire chapters are missing, then what exactly is this a copy of? Then this can't be a copy of what is up there. If this is the copy of what is up there, then what exactly was revealed to Muhammad when Allah was revealing it to Muhammad? And why did Allah reveal what He was revealing to Muhammad? It doesn't make any sense. It simply it is flawed.
It's so flawed. And like I said, at this point, before, one other criticism I want to add on the ahruf is the ahruf hadith never defines what constitutes a variant that will be classified as ahruf and a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So we have no distinctive framework given to us by the Quran or the hadith to decipher, okay, this problem or this variant is more likely to be a scribal error versus being a revealed part of the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm trying to say is, actually, scribal errors have most probably, like we saw, became part of the Quranic recitation, but Muslims didn't realize that they're actually reciting an error and not the speech of God,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that too. But at the end of this, this concludes the presentation, and I would say that it is absolutely near impossible, absurd, and irrational at this point to assert that the Quran is perfectly dot to dot, word by word, letter to letter. You just cannot sustain that proposition at all whatsoever in academia.
You just froze, but I believe you said preserved, so you just froze. But I believe what you were saying is that it is not possible to claim at this point that the Quran was perfectly preserved. I would completely agree. I mean, as a Muslim, you learn it might not make sense to people of other religions. It might not make sense to a Christian or a Jew, for example, and it definitely makes much less sense to a Hindu or a Buddhist or all the other religious groups. But to a Muslim, it is a very big claim that the Quran is quote unquote the only book that hasn't been changed, or the only book that has been perfectly preserved. And to Christians and Jews, that statement doesn't really make sense. And the average Christian and Jew thinks, so what? Because Christians and Jews don't have the doctrine that they are meant to have a book that has been sorry, David Wood just said, haha, he froze. The great God Allah silenced him. Stop distracting me, David. God, where was I going? So the Christians and Jews don't have this claim that they are meant to have a book that was perfectly preserved, perfectly spoken by the Almighty God, and that can never be changed until the end of time. Because according to the Jews and Christians, they simply have a message. They have a collection, a giant compilation of reports that people wrote down, partly inspired, partly directly inspired by God to word for word what to write, but in other parts simply written by people and then organized as a holy book, simply to read read what is being said, you know, what happened in the past, what is there to learn, not exactly word for word what is right and what is wrong, you know, because that is a Quranic Islamic concept, and that Quranic Islamic concept obviously doesn't work, which is why we have this problem, which is why we have huge variations, which is why Islamic scholars come up with the excuse that this was actually deliberate, that there was actually a reasoning behind it, that there was actually a point behind it, a point that doesn't make any sense to anybody. Because as said, and there is no way that you can refute this claim, that you can refute this analysis, that we are so many cultures today in this world, and everybody can read the same Quran, can maintain the same Quran, can recite the same Quran, and it is easily recitable for everybody in the world. There really is no point, no importance to having different versions of the Quran at all, let alone forget about the recitations, forget about the mistakes, forget about the little letter issues. Mm-hmm. Having entire discrepancies in entire chapters and entire verses. There was even the problem. Go ahead. Sure.
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to add, that the surah order is very highly disputed as well.
That too.
Not just the verse numbering. If you were to read Al-Fahrist and the orders, they're vividly off. Even sometimes the verses occur in different sequences. So the point is that, again, this comes back to the claim with the linguistic precision of the Quran and the miracle of the 19 and stuff. Actually, I'll just give you one quick example to give you an idea. So take Nomali Khan's example. We have made you the middle nation, right? It occurs, this verse occurs in verse 143 of Surah Baqarah, okay? And he says that Surah Baqarah has 286 verses, therefore it occurring in the middle is a miracle. But what he fails to realize that apart from the Hafs tradition, the Warsh does not count up to 286 verses, it's 287 or 288. So the miracle doesn't work, right? So you have to selectively cherry pick certain versions of the Quran to make certain numerical miracles work, right? This is one other point.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't there an entire issue with the 9th chapter of the Quran, with Surah Tawbah? There was I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, but there is a narration about that entire chapter, which is that as the people were putting the Quran together, you know, it was a huge process in which Zayd was going around and was trying to collect all the different notes that exist about the Quran, and all the different oral traditions that exist about the Quran, and he was trying to put it together. And people had that one chapter, which was chapter 9, which also happens to be the most brutal, the most violent chapter in the Quran.
Interesting is that 9 is the last chapter revealed.
Yeah, the last chapter. Muhammad died. I mean, the hadith, I think, as far as I remember, goes that he was reciting that chapter. He was revealing that chapter, and shortly after he revealed that chapter, he died. And he never told them what happens to that chapter, what is supposed to happen to that. So the people wanted to add it to the end of a different chapter, but what they instead did was to just make it a separate chapter, and that chapter doesn't start with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which is at the beginning of every Quran chapter. So an entire chapter was just arbitrarily planted into the Quran without any instructions, without anything. And the Muslim followers of Muhammad just did that. So when you read the Quran and you come to chapter 9, you are just looking at a chapter that Muhammad randomly revealed to people, but he never further gave any instructions about it. And the Muslims just thought, well, what are we going to do with this chapter? This sounds like that chapter. Let's just put it here. You know, that's what you're looking at. So it is completely an arbitrarily organized book with no order, no proper value, obviously no proper preservation.
I mean, I haven't even delved into the Shia perspective, because just to give you an idea, that
what I
showed you was just the major variants. There's upwards of about 1,000 oral variants. I have a Quran, it's a Mus'haf with all the 10 variants listed in the margin. I kid you not, there is not a single page in that book almost without a variant on it. A lot of the variants are oral, so they still sometimes affect the meaning, but there's so many. And then Shias allege that the Quran has been changed, and there's many surahs and whatnot. And this has been an ongoing debate between Shias and Sunnis about the tahrif of the Quran, right? So this isn't something new that's being brought forth. It's just that it's being so shielded. This knowledge isn't provided to the average Muslim, and now we know why, because it's so damaging.
Yeah.
Claim that it's from God.
this is why this is such a big issue. I mean, the average Muslim doesn't know any of this. The average Muslim never learns about this because this issue is considered very controversial and very sensitive, which is why the Muslim scholars don't want the average Muslim to be confronted with this issue, so that their faith is not shaken, which is now going on in the Muslim world. Gladly, I'm so happy about that. So that's why it's so important for us to bring out these truths and to show to the average Muslim what really went wrong with the history. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Shia perspective is that they acknowledge that mostly that the Quran that we hold in our hands was organized like this by the Sahaba, by the Caliphs. And the Shia Muslims don't really acknowledge, don't really recognize the Quran as it has been organized, as it has been eventually finalized. But over time, they just went along with it, and they just used it anyway, so to not be branded as deviants and as heretics and kuffar, and because there is not much that they could else do about it. So
talking about the Shia thing, I just had a variant pop into my head that I just forgot to mention this point earlier in the stream. Have you noticed that when Shias do wudu, they don't wash their feet, they just rub their hand on the foot, versus Sunnis?
I'm aware of it, yeah.
There's a variant in the verse of the wudu verse, I think Surah Ma'idah, something to do with arjulikum and arjulakum, something like that, where one variant reads to wash the feet and one reads to just moisten the feet. And this variant actually lead to the whole bifurcation between the Shia and Sunni about the wudu. Now, what's also interesting is Dr. Ramon Harvey, academic, he wrote a paper on Ibn Masud's readings that survived and were used to form legal rulings in the Hanafi madhab, meaning that the scholars were actually seeing the variant readings of Ibn Masud as authentic and going off basing legal rulings off of that. So that's one point I wanted to make as well. But I was wondering now that since we've kind of wrapped up all of this, if there's any questions or any
I could go into that. Yeah, I will quickly go through the super chats, especially. I would never want to just let them hang around here. Quickly, David Wood just asked, does Abdullah Gondal have a YouTube channel?
I don't have a YouTube channel myself, but I do come on and off on Abdullah Samir's channel and other YouTube channels like Haris Sultan. Mm-hmm. But I am working towards my own YouTube channel. It's just very busy with school and life and the pandemic and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But I've been trying to work on it for over a year, so.
You should go on David Wood's channel. Yeah, too. You should be a guest on his channel. I'm advertising you here directly. I'm doing a great service to everybody. Okay, super chats. Hindu historian made a super chat at the beginning. Didn't say anything, just posted a sticker with thumbs. Hindu historian also made a super chat earlier and said, "Truth alone triumphs." I agree. Thank you for always being here. Chrisanti P said, "Keep it up." Thank you. Abdullah Samir made a super chat and said, "Abdullah Gondal is a big shaitan."
I'm an Ifrit, the big jinn.
Oh, good. Wonderful acknowledgements here. Perfect for the average Muslim listener to relate to us and to see goodness in us. Act 17, David Wood, obviously, made a super chat earlier and said, "I'm starting to think that there might be some holes in the narrative." Sayyid Ibrahim made a super chat and said, "There are so many Qurans like Hafs, Walsh, Husseini, Sana, Samarkandi. Then why do Muslims say that the Quran is preserved?" Exactly. So that was the entire point of this chat. I would actually, after this, I would maybe like to make a little bit, maybe make a short bite-sized video just about this topic with your references. I would like to maybe shorten this live stream because I think this is invaluable and this should be viewed easily by the average Muslim too. And people tend to watch shorter things better, so I will definitely do that. Solitary Emmy made a super sticker. Thank you, Solitary Emmy. I appreciate it. Hadi Ghafurian made a super chat without any comments. Introverted Smiles made a super chat. Hello, Introverted Smiles. And said, "Allah has a hard time remembering when quoting people." Yeah. Zigzag made a super chat and just posted a unicorn. That's a super sticker, I believe. Adolfo Madrid made a super chat and said, AP, you are awesome. Thank you so much, Adolfo Madrid. I appreciate it. And Anita V said, AP and Abdullah, much respect to your integrity. Thank you. Nadaver said, great stream as usual, Ridwan. I mean, Abdullah's superior and very much twirl-worthy mustache alone is worthy of a live stream, with his extensive knowledge coming in at a close second. Sayyid Ibrahim made a super chat saying, the only prophet I follow is Apostate prophet. Of course, you don't want to be stoned, right? B. Demirbash made a super sticker, which I appreciate very much. Thank you. No comment added, but thank you so much. No, there are no questions here. No one is asking questions. Okay. Wait, I'll go ahead. Zigzag said, please discuss Dan Gibson and Tom Holland's findings. Also check Adam El-Masri's channel. He's a religious historian. The channel is in Arabic, but I think you'll be very interested in what he has to say. Do you know about Dan Gibson's work? Or
I have looked at his work. Like I said, in all honesty, academia doesn't take his theory seriously. Although, like he has pointed out to some evidences, but academics have said that it's not taken as seriously.
How dare you say that?
I'll just say that.
I hope that answers the question.
It's an interesting theory, though. Like, it definitely is very interesting.
You mean the whole Petra issue, right?
Yeah.
Mecca was Petra. So people keep bringing that up to me, and I responded quite a few times to that. I said I don't really buy it. I find that narrative has holes in it. No, but I believe when I look at the documentary and the findings about that the original Mecca was actually Petra, I see a lot of discrepancies about that. I made a lot of notes and thought I should maybe make a brief video on why I don't think that is a plausible explanation. Like, one of the explanations is that a certain is that certain hadiths are quoted, but then as supporting evidence that Mecca was actually Petra. But then there are hadith on a similar level that clearly talk about Medina with its name, for example, with its original name, and you just cannot reconcile those two things. You cannot at the same time claim that this refers obviously to Petra, but then completely dismiss hadith that obviously talk about the region, the Hijaz region. Yeah. But go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing, like you said, that there would be hadith saying that these gardens and gardens these Sahabas had, and he's like, Mecca didn't have any gardens, but then he wouldn't mention the hadith about the deserts and the dates and all that, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. It's a very complicated topic. I don't know if I ever want to go into that, but super chat by Zuhair Nakvi said, have there been any findings of entire verses or chapters added or removed? I believe this question came before we went into that, but we actually addressed that issue during the
there are like, if you were to read Kitab al-Masahif and stuff, it's scandalous. Like, it's got insane amount of variations. What we're hoping to find is if we can actually find a companion codex. Let's say if we can actually find Ibn Masud's Quran, it's game over, right? I mean, the Sana Quran itself, the lower text, was also very much they've argued as a companion codex too. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of variations that will come up to light. And also, just to let you know that I was talking to academics that are leading the research on the Sana Quran, and they said that not all of the folios have been surveyed. Some of the folios are still not handing them over. And I don't know why, but this find has been around since the 70s. And when was the Sana one published? In like 2011 by the scholar of the paper reference. So just to show you that there's a lot of politics and also that plays into it. So wait, hopefully we'll find one day an Ibn Masud Quran. That would be gold.
One day. Until that day, we all have to believe that the Quran has been perfectly preserved and believe in Allah with all our heart, despite all the evidence that clearly already points against it.
One thing is I find it hilarious as Muslims, and Yasir Qadhi said too, like, we just say that the Quran is preserved because the Quran says the Quran is preserved in Surah 15, verse 9. That's not how you go about these things. That's logic, dude. Like,
that is circular reasoning. Yeah. The Quran has been preserved because the Quran says that it has been perfectly preserved. which means the Quran has been perfectly preserved because the Quran says it has perfectly. That is a prime example of circular reasoning. So it doesn't work. That's something you do because you have to believe that Islam is the truth, and there is no other way. That you cannot possibly take any evidence against that fundamental belief that Islam is the absolute truth. Super chat by Michael Gallimore said, "Are there any variations with the Zamzam well story?"
The whole story, I mean, how the Zamzam water well started, I don't think it ever was true.
There's not much detail to it anyway.
Yeah,
so it's not
like if you were to read the Ibn Ishaq or Tabari or other books like the Sira books, then they go into these wilder claims. But paganism and actually these rituals have a pagan origin. Like Mufti Abu Layth even talked about a few of these too, but that's another topic. Yeah,
I made a big video about that, which I still look at. I was in a great mood when I made that. I call it the Zamzam water craziness or something like that. I don't know. I made something like that like 2 years ago. Please go watch it. It's very nice. I started it with the joke that I'm with a little skit where I was wiping myself with Zamzam water, which you're not supposed to do. I don't know why I'm doing such things. B. Demirbash made a super chat and said, Ridwan, does he know Dr. Sami Al-Deep from Switzerland? Dr. Al-Deep is coming weekly to Gig TV, that's a Turkish YouTube channel, a Turkish atheist YouTube channel, and revealing the errors of the Qurans, especially linguistic errors. He also has his own YouTube channel in Arabic and French. Do you know about Dr. Sami Al-Deep?
No, I do not.
Interesting potential guest. I will make a note of that and possibly.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah. You could actually. I could bring you two together. You could endlessly talk about this boring topic. I'm just kidding. About this crucial topic. Saint Miles made a super chat and said, "Bacon, bacon, bacon." To all the Muslim trolls on this chat, your eyes have touched bacon. Now you will dream of eating it. Since you are looking at the super chat, you will also be touched by a used. No. Come on.
I also just remembered, it just popped in my head that the famous Quran verse about the sun setting in the pond, that verse also has a variant.
Really?
Yeah. So the variant is Hamiya and Hamiya. It's how it's pronounced, and it means like either a muddy spring or a black spring of boiling water. That's the thing. So they say like if the sun goes in, it makes it boil and it's dark. It adds up. What's also ironic is the verse that says the Quran is preserved, Surah 15, verse 9. The verse preceding it, Surah 15, verse 8, we saw it had a variant in it. Hilarious. The irony.
That is so ridiculous. I don't even know where to start with this. Hindu Story made a super sticker. Hindu Story made another super sticker. Bruce Way made a super sticker. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
There are a lot of super chats. What is happening here? Hubert Farnsworth made a super chat and said, "What is your thought on why the Sana manuscript had a lower text different than the more recent text on the same parchment paper?"
Yeah, so like we discussed, it was a companion codex, and over time when these companion codex and the discrepancies were evolving, Caliph Osman decided, no, we have to destroy the Qur'ans that disagree. So what ends up happening is what a palimpsest, the parchment, isn't easy to make. It's like killing a lot of animals. It's basically animal skin, right? So a lot of the times, instead of destroying the parchment, they rub it off to reuse it. And instead of this time, what seems to have happened that Osman's the canonized Quran was written on top of this old companion codex that was rubbed off. That's the theory that has been put forth by quite a few academics, and is one of the most leading serious theories about the Sana palimpsest.
Wonderful. It just gets more problematic for Islam. Zuhair Naqvi made another super chat and said, "I would request a review of In Search of Ali ibn Talib's Codex by Saifuddin Kara from Mr. Gondal. I think it offers a unique perspective to the discussion."
So there are actually, I remember now, I researched this topic 2 years ago. There's a Turkish scholar who came out with new Qur'an that he said match the variants recorded, not only the manuscripts, but in the hadith and the riwayas. And he has these codices for Abu Bakr and then Uthman and Ali, like you said. I think that the scholar you just named, I think that is the person. I'm not.
Might be. I see that he has had a past with It's probably it. Probably answers the question. Vaiba Chaudhary said, "How do you say that?"
Chaudhary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Said, "Why Allah?" I don't know how you people speak. I'm just kidding. Don't be offended. Vaiba Chaudhary said, "Why is Allah so needy?" Saint Miles made a super chat and said, "Great program and intelligent conversation. Thank you. I really agree. I think this topic has been very good, very valuable. There's a lot to do with this. I definitely want to
snippets out of the video.
Yeah. I want to make maybe 2 different references to this video afterwards in the following days. I would just make my type of video under 10 minutes to summarize what's going on here.
Yeah.
And then I would also like to take this live stream and just really shorten it or take little bits to make it watchable for the average viewer, and especially also for the average Muslim viewer, because I think this is a very important topic that needs to be processed, that needs to be talked about, needs to be watched. And I really appreciate that how you have handled this, Abdullah. I really
thank you.
Big respect.
Thank you.
Quickly, Vaiba Chaudhary made another super chat and said, "Love from India," and another super chat and said, "Please take my name, love from India." I did. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, that's all to the super chats.
Okay. I think it's been on for about 2 hours. I think that's good.
You already want to go? We're just starting.
Oh man, I'm so tired. I for those who don't know, this is like my 3rd live stream in 24 hours.
I don't care. The night has just begun. We have to we have to go through this. No, just kidding. Of course, you're obviously very tired. You have put a lot of effort into this. I really appreciate it.
I love that. Thanks for having me, man. It was an honor, and I mean, you reached such a big audience. So, like I said, seeing that you brought me on, like I really thank you for that. Appreciate for that, and then hopefully, like this topic and the timing of this, hopefully keeps opening the eyes of people that the whole keeps getting bigger. And I keep hoping that this becomes common knowledge to every Muslim. Because like you can go to a mosque or go to do a survey of a mosque at a Jummah prayer outside and ask the Muslims, is the Quran preserved? They'll tell you, yes, only one Quran and everything. 90% of the people, if not. But till then, that's all from my side. It was a pleasure being here and discussing this topic. If, like I said, if there's anything you want for the references, we will leave them in the link below. I will upload all these slides freely accessible so people can spread this information. And you can pass them along, whatever, from my side, that's all.
Wonderful. You can just send me whatever you want me to give to the viewers. I would love to attach them to a pinned comment to the description. Well, I appreciate it very much. I think I would have loved to get a background introduction with you, because I think you have a very different background when it comes to experiencing Islam and leaving Islam, because many ex-Muslims might just might simply have basic experiences with Islam and then leave Islam because they can just not reconcile Islam's morality with their own morality, or Islam's knowledge with their own knowledge. But I think you made a very intellectually important journey through Islam and out of Islam, which is why I would love to bring your perspective personally to this channel again. So I would love to have you again here for just a completely personal talk just about you and about leaving Islam, about your experiences with it, your criticism of it. So we all expect you here again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I guess it's good night from me for today, and I'm looking forward to the next time, and we will have let's say we'll pick a topic that is more controversial, and and we'll have a discussion on it and see where it goes.
It will be
But,
about the mustache, probably. That's the most controversial thing. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much again, Abdullah, for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks for viewing. I appreciate your attendance, your appreciation, your comments, and everything that you have left. I'll see you again. Have a fantastic day. And as always, do you want to say a few things, Abdullah?
all I'm going to say is Science Hafiz, good night, good morning, Assalamu alaikum. Have a good day, and may the good Lord be with you.
Wow, that's fantastic. I will just say stay away from Islam. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.